slate. I'm going to go game by game and share my screen, and we're going to figure out what we're going to do with the slate. It's a big one, a lot of ways to go, and we're going to just take a quick first look here and see what we're going to do. So I will be live today at 6 Eastern, and we'll cover this. We'll also talk a little NBA Showdown for anybody playing it. Sort of a day, like these Thursdays are weird, so coming off sort of like a little bit of not a day off. I had some stuff I had to take care of, but it was a very, very strange baseball day to be sure. Anyway, we'll get into it game by game here and talk through this slate. All right, so let me grab my starting lineups page. I'm using the RG starting lineups page. Sometimes use the MLB one, but I like just having sort of some referenceable data available. So I sometimes use this one. All right. Anyway, let's talk about starting off first. We're going to start with Philadelphia and Chicago. You've got Stroman and Suarez. I think I'm going to be off this for pitching, and I am probably going to be off the hitting as well. You see here, it's got a decent run total. I do like that, you have a little bit of wind blowing out. I don't like picking on Stroman, and I think Suarez is good enough. I think there's an argument you could make for maybe getting some Cubs into your lineups, but overall, that's not what I'm going to be trying to target for. So I think that this is probably going to end up being a pass game for you for the most part, with the exception, of course, of the greatest player in history, maybe Christopher Morel as a one-off. He's probably my favorite Cub. The guy is just crazy. I don't know what's going on. He just comes up and he swings like crazy, and he'll run too. So I love that idea. So anyway, let's jump on to the next one. Detroit, Washington. You can see that we've got a pretty low total here. It is decent hitting weather, and I don't mind getting to the cheap Tigers as a potential, like maybe a mini stack more than an actual full stack. But I also think that you can make an argument a little bit for some of the Washington bats because of the pricing. And I think Matt Boyd also deserves to be in conversation just because he's cheap enough and it's Washington. Boyd has some walk issues. Washington's pretty aggressive, not very patient. So maybe they can, level itself out a little bit. But I do think that Detroit and Washington both have viable pieces. They're not as cheap as they used to be in Detroit, so it's not quite as appealing. And Washington just doesn't have the power. It's not very exciting. But if you wanted to end up with an Alex Call or something like that as a cheapo, I don't mind it. Not my favorite spot to attack here. All right, let's talk about Baltimore and Toronto. Kikuchi and Gibson. I actually think that, Kikuchi is fine, but I'm probably going to go other directions most likely. And I like the idea of stacking Toronto here. I think, you've got a nice total. Gibson, we know historically has been reverse splits. He's been actually like just sort of the normal Kyle Gibson. He hasn't really given up the crazy number of home runs, but you can run on him a little bit. He does tend to give up a lot of hard contact. This is a tough lineup to get through. I like the Blue Jays right off the bat as one of, I'd say they're probably right now my fifth stack, but I think I might even end up moving them up a little bit. So I do like Toronto, and I'm probably not going to be on the Kikuchi thing, even though I think that it's reasonable. He's in my mix, but nothing I'm excited about. And if you're not going to play him, I don't mind if you want to get to some bats, although I'm finding it not that appealing to stack Baltimore on this slate. All right, New York and Cleveland. Quantrill and Carrasco. I feel like, we don't think Carrasco's going to even pitch enough probably to be too relevant. I think that you could make an argument for the Mets, but they've just been so bad. And the prices are not really reflecting that, I don't know where I feel like they should be. They're fine. Not my favorite. Probably going to end up passing on this game as well. We will find stuff we like, I promise. Sorry, guys. I'm still getting over a little bit of a sinus thing. So excuse my nasaliness. Hello, Joanne. Good to see you as always. Been a rough golf week so far, but we'll see. It's a long ways to go. A lot of guys, we don't even know who's going to make the cut yet. All right, Atlanta, Seattle, Elder, and Miller. I don't mind the idea of Elder. This is sort of how I feel with a bunch of things today, and I'm not really. I'm open to the idea of the Braves against Miller. You could put a young pitcher out there against this Braves team. It can always be a potential recipe for disaster. So I actually am going to put Atlanta as currently a team that I really want to consider targeting today at low ownership. Elder, I mean, look, Miller was really good, but he hasn't faced this team yet, and this is a really, really powerful lineup that if you get young pitchers, it can go one of two ways. You might get that 25 fantasy point game, and you might get that just completely that complete shelling. So I do think Atlanta is in play for me. Decent hitting conditions, 73 degrees in Atlanta, great hitters park. You do have a little bit of wind blowing in, but nothing that's going to keep us off of it. So I think that's certainly a spot that I would look at. All right, let's move over to Texas and Colorado. We've got Perez and Carl Kaufman, which is going to end up being somewhat of a bullpen game, I think, to some extent for Colorado. Martin Perez has not been good, but I actually think he's in play here against a pretty weak Colorado offense. Colorado's having trouble even at home, so I'm not afraid of picking them on the road. Just only a 3.4 total. It's always frustrating with Perez because even when he pitches well, you're not getting the strikeouts that you really need to win tournaments. But he is reasonable enough. He belongs in that, I guess if you're going to consider that the thin plays of the Boyd, they're all lefties, which is kind of interesting. Boyd and Kikuchi, I think that he's a very similar play to those plays, but is probably a little bit better of a spot. So maybe you give him a little boost above the others. I like Texas today. I think that this is a very reasonable stack, and I think that it's going to be owned a reasonable amount. But I think this is a fair spot to try to attack Texas. And you have Seager back in the lineup. They are expensive. It's hard to get them all in. You can use guys like Grossman or Duran as value savers, but it is an expensive stack to try to get in. And I think it's a very reasonable one. So I like Texas, and I'm open to Perez. Still haven't found that pitcher that I feel really confident in yet. But we got a little bit of ways to go here. Okay, so we've got Houston, Oakland. I think that Oakland is, I think that Houston is certainly a viable stack. They haven't been all that great in terms of full stacks this season, but they are certainly in a great spot tonight. You have the worst bullpen in baseball, and you've got, Oakland doesn't have any starting pitcher who I wouldn't want to pick on at this point. Waldichuk has probably not been quite as bad as everybody thinks, but certainly makes sense to place in Houston, even against the lefty, where you've got Altuve supposed to be coming back today. Bregman has been terrible, but I still think is, worth taking some shots on. Abreu has been terrible. He has no power anymore, but he's 2,700 if you wanted to fill out a stack. Jolks is probably more desirable just because he at least has done some things this year. But I think the full stack is totally in play for Houston, and I think they're going to be pretty popular. May end up being the chalk of the slate, and I certainly understand why against the A's. I have interest in Houston, but not enough so to where I feel like I need to play them. So I'm going to have them on my list for now, and we'll revisit at the end where they shake out. Chicago and Kansas City, a little bit of wind blowing out to right center. You've got Greinke and Kopech. Kopech is a weird one because he's a guy we want to pick on now, but the problem is he sometimes shows signs of maybe being a little bit more back to the old guy he was. When he can't find the strike zone, you just really want to try and target guys like that. The problem is the team he's facing in Kansas City doesn't have the patience maybe to take full advantage of it. Anyway, long story short, I'm not interested in the pitching in this game. I am interested in both sides of the hitting, particularly Kansas City, because Kopech, they're oppositely bad pitchers. Okay. So you have Kopech who walks everyone, Greinke who doesn't walk anyone, but gets hit really hard. So I do think that this whole game in general is definitely one we want to attack. I have KC as being the better stack, but I do like the White Sox. I probably have more White Sox in my lineups, if that makes sense. I think they make more sense as a 3-man for me than as a full 5-man. And I'm curious to see how their lineup shakes out too. They have some cheap pieces. I'm wondering where they're going to end up. But obviously, Luis Robert. I want to see where Berger ends up in the lineup. Vaughn batting fifth. Should be batting fifth, and he's 2,600. You've got Sheets is really cheap. So it's a very, very cheap stack that you can definitely pair in there with a more expensive one. And then you've got the fairly chalky Kansas City side. I like all the chalky guys here, and I would throw Melendez in there as my next favorite. But I do think this is probably one of the better spots on the slate to attack. All right. Cardinals scored 1,000,000 runs again yesterday. Sort of bouncing back here. I am not finding a lot of love for either of these pitchers here. Matt's the kind of guy that used to give the Dodgers problems. I'm not as worried about it here. I'm just gonna take a quick look at the weather. Looks like we have, the wind blowing in is going to make it a little bit harder for me to want to play the righties from the Dodgers. Godslin's good enough to make me want to stay off of St. Louis. You do have the 12-mile-an-hour winds blowing in from left and a little bit of potential rain. This game feels more like a stay away to me. I'll revisit that one later at 6. But as of right now, I'm not overly interested in the Dodgers or St. Louis or either of the pitching sides. Everything is just sort of just enough to keep me away from it. All right, Minnesota and the Angels, Joe Ryan and Reed Detmers. I can see, a really good case being made for both of these pitchers. I'd like to have an upside pitcher, so I'm going to play some Joe Ryan today. We know that it's a streaky offense with the Angels, but once you get past the top 4 in the order, I don't think you're overly terrified of the rest of this lineup. So if Ryan can get those guys, 70% of the time and then just work through the rest of the lineup, I really do think this is a spot for him to potentially have a big game. And I also think that even though Minnesota is, even though Detmers I think is viable, I actually don't mind that some of the Minnesota bats, particularly, I know he hasn't been as good, but Buxton, Kyle Farmer is cheap, and Correa would be my 3 favorites. And you can see the ownership reflecting that. But I don't mind a mini stack of Minnesota. And I'm also going to keep Detmers open because I'm just having trouble finding pitchers that I actually like today. All right, mini. Sorry, I'm just trying to get my notes in. All right, we'll move on to Boston and San Diego. Remember about Boston, they're just a much better hitting team at home. This is one of the biggest park downgrades for them. I'm going to play some Blake Snell tonight. I don't have enough guys that I love for me to just cross them off. And I'm interested in what's happening with this Paxton situation. It is weird. This guy, for 4 years, I just haven't even thought of him. And he looked pretty good. I don't think he's viable to play. I'm just trying to decide if I want to go for a Padres stack. It is a surprisingly low total. Another cold day in San Diego, 63 degrees. I do think this is a spot where I would normally be looking to stack San Diego. So I do want to keep an open mind to that. I think these guys are completely reasonable and they're going to be really low owned against Paxton and I think a bad bullpen behind him. So I actually am going to bump San Diego up into one of my stacks. And I probably won't be able to rank my stacks right now, but I'll rank them a little later. Well, I'll try to do my best to rank them now. I do think San Diego is interesting. And yeah, I think Snell right now is my number 2, my natural SP2. All right. Well, I guess if you're not playing, these guys, but really for me, I love Alcantara. He would be along with Ryan, my 1 and 1A. I don't care that he hasn't been quite the same. I'm going to bet on the long-term results. DeScalfani, this is not like an incredible price for him. It is a good matchup. So I think we should consider him, but it does feel like as chalk at this price that maybe we could consider doing something else. But I do think Alcantara is a really strong play, and I pretty much don't have much interest in this game outside of Alcantara. I'm open to the DeScalfani thing just because I don't have other pitchers, but I don't think there's anything I'm going to try to prioritize. All right. So just to sum up a few things, Joe Ryan, Blake Snell, Sandy Alcantara are my 3 top pitchers. My stacks, I don't have the orders down yet. I think I want to attack the KC Chicago situation. I do like Houston, but they're going to be popular. They would probably rate as the number 1 stack, just they're going to be a little bit more owned. And then I get into the Texas, Atlanta, Toronto, and San Diego as my main ones. I think that I'll end up with more of the KC, Chicago, Houston, and then probably Atlanta, Toronto would be my next 2, followed by Texas, followed by San Diego. That's sort of the order I'm looking at. It's fine, Travis, because I don't like the pitching that much. I don't particularly like Elder today. I think he's fine. He's on my list, but he's not, I'm not trying to get to him. I don't like DeScalfani all that much, but he's fine. And I don't have interest in the Cubs. So I think the Cubs are fine, but it's just not not overly desirable. I do think the Cubs actually are viable. I didn't find them. They're not in my top 6 stacks, but I think you could certainly make a case for them. It's kind of weird with the pricing to play them, so I'm not loving it. But I want to see how the lineup shakes out. I want to see if Bellinger's back in there, and I want to see just sort of how it shakes out before I make my final decisions there. Anyway, guys, I appreciate all you guys. Good luck to everybody today, and I'll see you guys at 6 Eastern, and I will have all my content posted a little later this afternoon.